My Rabbi say, Kimin Hogenu, a Shia starts with a little bit of Inyane Drush, particularly Achilas Matzah. The Chazon says one of the only mitzvahs deraisa of Achila that we still have. We don't have Achilas Kodshim, we don't have Achilas Truma. We're still Zeicha, a mitzvah deraisa of Achilas Matzah. And besides being a mitzvah deraisa, besides the value and the chashivas of mitzvahs Achilas Matzah, we know from the Zayah Kodesh in Parshas Tetzaveh that matzah is called Mechla da Svusa. It has healing properties. Asva is a doctor. The matzah that we eat, each and every one of us on Pesach, has medicinal powers, has the power of refuah. Now, this power of refuah obviously means in a literal way as well that the person wants to be gesund, then Achilas Matzah is healthy. The mitzvah of Achilas Matzah is good for our health. But the Zohar explains beyond this, that the mitzvah of Achilas Matzah provides us with protection, a year-round protection. That means as follows. Without getting involved in exactly what chimutz is and the technical idea that when you take one of the 5 grains and you mix them with water, and the water is H2O, and it combines and creates carbon dioxide, which makes chimutz, that's in a physical sense. But the Zohar explains that every time we eat chametz during the year, chametz draws a person closer to Olam Hazeh. Chametz strengthens our relationship and affinity to the Yetzer Hara of this world. And it's so strong, this effect of chametz, says the Zohar, that really the more chametz that we eat during the year, the more it draws us away from the focal point of Yiddishkeit. It draws us away from having a cheshek to learn a Blat Gemara, cheshek to daven and to do mitzvahs. In the same way that a person can take some pills for 1 week and it strengthens his body, his physique, he's now a stronger person and he can cope with a certain amount of exposure to infectious diseases. Says the Zohar Kodesh, 1 week of eating matzah fortifies every one of us, strengthens our connection with Yiddishkeit, our connection with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, our connection with Torah, and it's so strong and so potent that it gives us a year-long protection that I can now go and eat a whole year of chimutz and be involved in Olam Hazeh and running my business, and nevertheless I will stay close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The matzah, besides being a mitzvah and besides being a physical protection, protects our relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So far, in the Zohar in Parshas Tetzaveh, there's a wonderful chibur called Sha'arei Oira. The Mechaber was Rabbi Yosef Giktilia from the Rishonim, from the Kadmonim in Kabbalah. He wrote a sefer called Sha'arei Oira, which is well known and mefursam and printed in many places. The Baal Sha'arei Oira, Rabbi Yosef Giktilia, also wrote a pirush on Agodah Shel Pesach. And thanks to Yedidenu Shlomo, who gives us this present every time again, another volume of Yeshurun. In Yeshurun and volume Chav Daled, we are Zeicha been printed in a Geschmacke print from the original Ksav Yad of Rabbi Yitzchak Diktilia on Shel Pesach. Incidentally, Yedidi Reb Shlomo, Arafur Shlema, you sound a bit under the weather, and that's for sure because you're overdoing it in your efforts on behalf of all of us, and in the name of myself and all of us, we wish you a Arafur Shlema, which you so richly deserve. Rabbi Yosef Diktilia explains something fascinating. The Gemara says in Kiddushin Daf Lamed Ches that Klal Yisrael ate mon for 40 years, but they didn't get mon immediately when they left Mitzrayim. First, they went out with MATZOS. Subsequently, HaKadosh Baruch Hu substituted the MATZOS and he gave them the mon. How can the Pesach say we ate mon for 40 years? It wasn't 40 years. It was from when the mon started until the mon finished, when we came to Eretz Yisrael. Says the Gemara that the matzah that we took out of Mitzrayim had the same taste as the mon, and therefore when the Torah writes we ate mon for 40 years, it includes into the cheshbon the time when we ate the matzah that we took with us when we went out of Mitzrayim, because it had the same taste as the mon. On the surface, sounds like it had the same taste as the mon, which is very difficult to understand, because the mon l'chayra, maybe it did or it didn't have a tam, katama katzapichis b'dvash. And why did their matzahs that they went out of Mitzrayim taste like katzapichis b'dvash? Rabbi Yosef Diktilia explains that when the Gemara says it had the same taste as the mon, it doesn't mean the same physical taste, it means it had the same properties as the mon. The mon was given by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It says in the Medrash, and it says in many Makoros, the purpose of the mon was that we should be removed from Olam Hazeh. And the more mon that we ate in the 40 years in the Midbar, the more the Yidden had a cheshek to do mitzvahs and a cheshek to learn Torah. Lo nitna Torah elo la'ochlei hamon. Every time you ate another piece of mon, it removed you further from Olam Hazeh, and it gave you a cheshek to learn Torah. The Shmeitzer, in the Hakdama of Shev Shmeitzer, brings down from the Sefer Magid Mesharim. Magid Mesharim is the Sefer which Rabbi Yosef Karo wrote from his dreams when he had a Magid who came to him every night. And the Magid Mesharim writes that the Malach revealed to me, I think in Magid Mesharim Pashas Re'eh, that eating mon was necessary, prerequisite before Kabbalah Satir. The purpose of Yetzias Mitzrayim was Tavnas Elikim al HaRav. We should be zoichet to learn Torah. Says the Magid Mesharim, the Malach said to him, to really want to learn Torah, a person needs to eat mon. That's why HaKadosh Baruch Hu took us to the Midbar. It's not like we imagine we were in the Midbar, we had nothing to eat, so what could he do? He had to give us mon, he had to provide. No, the other way around, says the Magid Mesharim. HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted to give us the Torah. And you can only get the Torah if you have a cheshek for Torah. You can only get the Torah if it's important for you to learn Torah. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu removed us from all the regular food. He took us to the Midbar so as to force us to eat mon, and the mon will drive us and channel our energies that we want to learn Torah. And then HaKadosh Baruch Hu could give us the Torah. Says the Shmeitzer in the Akdama, very interesting, cryptic remark. And he says, even though the Magid Mesharim says this about the Achilas Hamon, but he says, V'adover yodua shekein hu l'doros. This concept that there's a food which you eat, which gives you cheshek to learn Torah and do mitzvahs, that still exists, l'doros. Sosam v'lei pirish. He doesn't explain what that food is and in which way it's mashpia. Says Rabbi Yosef Diktilia, this is what the Gemara means in Kiddushin Daf Lamed Ches. Charora sheitziu miMitzrayim, the matzah which they ate when they went out of Mitzrayim, which the Zohar calls a mechla d'asvusa, it heals you. Matzah has the same properties as mon. In the same way as lo nitna Torah elo la'ochlei hamon, so too lo nitna Torah elo la'ochlei matzah. You eat matzah, it tempts you to learn Torah. It gives you a cheshek to learn Torah. This is so necessary before Kabbalah Satir. The Gemara tells us in Yuma Divine Base, very famous Lashon. The Gemara says that there's a Kesakuna, a Kesamalchus, and a Kesser Torah. Kesser Kahuna is nitna to who? To Zera Aaron. They're the ones to whom Hashem gives the Kesser Kahuna. Kesser Malchus is only given to Malchus, to Zera, Malchus based on it. Kesser Torah, Munachas Bekeren's office, it's sitting in the winkel from the winkel, in the corner. Whoever wants to can take it. It's free for all. That's the Pashut of Pshat in the Gemara. But the Maharal says, the Gemara doesn't mean it's in the corner. If you want to, you can pick it up. It's Hefka. No. The same way that the Kesser Malchus is given to someone. To whom? To the Zera of David HaMelech. And the Kesser Kahuna is given to the Zera of Aaron. The Kesser of Torah is given to whom? If Torah is chashav in your eyes, if you're a roitze l'ilmei Torah, if it's important for me, if I attach importance to the limud Torah, that's when HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives siyata d'shmaya to you. He gives the Kesser shel Torah. Learning Torah when Torah is not important, you won't get HaKadosh Baruch Hu on your side. Torah yivakshu mipiu, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is there to teach you Torah. If Torah is important, Munachas Bekeren's office, you're a roitze l'itoil, says the Yosef Diktilia, how do you become a roitze l'itoil? By achilas matzah. You eat matzah, you're a roitze l'itoil. As a Meir Gevot, Paroi said in Parshas Shmois, make the Yidden work harder. Don't agree to Moshe Rabbeinu who wants them to have a Shabbos, a day off. Make them work harder. Teven le'yinosei lehem. V'al yishu, let them not turn b'divrei sheker, to false lies. Says the Medrash, what did he mean, al yishu b'divrei sheker? Because Moshe Rabbeinu was convinced, Paroi, that we need a day off. What do we do on the day off? Megillas hayu lehem b'Mitzrayim, and they were learning Torah in Mitzrayim. Says Paroi, Tichbaro avoida, make them work harder, make them work on Shabbos. V'al yishu b'divrei sheker, let the Jews not turn to false ideologies of the Torah. And the Mefarshim ask, how can the Torah HaKadosh express itself? True, Paroi didn't believe in the Torah, but the Torah can call our Heilige Torah. The Torah refers to itself as divrei sheker. How can that be? And the Mefarshim say, if Klal Yisrael in the Mitzrayim would treat the Torah correctly, would realize that Limud HaTorah is of paramount importance, then Paroi would never have stopped us learning Torah. But Klal Yisrael looked at the Torah as something of secondary importance. If I have a day off on a Shabbos, I'll learn Torah. That's called divrei sheker. You're learning Torah, but you're learning Torah without attaching to it the true importance. That's divrei sheker. Reb Chaim Volozhin writes in Ruach Chaim that a person's cheshek for learning Torah should be so great that he should wish, halavai, I had no need to eat, and no need to drink, and no need to sleep, and I could spend 24 hours a day learning Torah. That's the darga that it should be, the shkeda and the cheshek that we should have for Torah. And you know something? If that's the way we would want to learn Torah, that's called a roitze l'itoil. And a roitze l'itoil, Yavor v'yitoil, HaKadosh Baruch Hu help him in his limud Torah. How can we in our Dor Shofel aspire to such a madrega, to madregas of cheshek in limud Torah? Says the Zoya, you eat matzah, and you mekayim the mitzvah achilas matzah. The matzah has no oil and hazeh in it. The matzah is a tool for creating cheshek for limud Torah in each and every one of us. Baruch Hashem, we sit together, a tzibur who are dedicated, who give up their time and the cheshek to learn a sugya and another sugya and yet another sugya. These are the people who appreciate the value of Torah. And although we go through the year eating chametz, we're heading towards Pesach when we're zeichet to eat matzah again. And the matzah will bring us back to the level where we want to be of cheshek in limud Torah, and will once again make us worthy of a great Kabbalah HaTorah. B'tzeischem mi Mitzrayim tavdon es elikim al ha'or hazeh. If this wonderful mitzvah of Achilas Matzah is so great, let us be ma'ayin a little bit in this sugya of LISHMAH in making matzah, of LISHMAH whether it needs dafka to be done by hand or can also be done by machine. As Reb Shlomo says, it's a mind she'ein lehem sof to discuss machine matzos. Before we get involved in the longest, a word or two in a general sense. Okay, so there's basically three ashkafos when it comes to machine matzos. There's those who feel that a machine matzah is noch besser wie the matzah from Moshe Rabbeinu. The best thing in the world that exists is a machine matzah. The machine takes care of it. The machine makes sure that it gets into the oven quickly. The machine never gets tired. The machine is reliable. You don't need to shout at the machine. The schönste Sache in the world. People like Reb Shmuel Salant, who said he doesn't want to be moitzi lav on the matzahs of Moshe Rabbeinu, but my machine matzahs are better. That's one madrega, one side of the spectrum. Then we have, all the way at the other side of the spectrum, we have Heilige Divrei Chaim, who had various objections to machine matzahs. And besides all the various objections, he writes, he also has a tam komos, a secret reason, which he's not revealing. And obviously, once he says he has a secret reason, even if we'll put right each one of the objections that the Divrei Chaim says, but he has a tam komos. Nothing in the world will get you past the tam komos. By the Divrei Chaim, machine matzahs are chometz. Hadvarim Yeduim that Kleizim Begaruv in Divrei Yatziv goes so far as to say that it could be that Tzanza Eineklach are not allowed to sit at the table where there are other Yidden eating machine matzahs, because in the same way that you can't have one person eating fleishigs and the other one milchigs at the table, unless there's a hecker in between the two of them, if they know one another. We're scared that chas v'sholem, the fellow who's eating fleishigs will take some cheese during his meal, says the Divrei Yatziv. The same thing applies to machine matzahs. Rachmuna litzlan, the fellow might take a crumb of machine matzah. Not only that, but he says that it could be that you can't make it siruf l'zimon, because by them eating a machine matzah is eating chametz, so you can't make it siruf l'zimon. And it might be that machine matzah is called chametz shavalav Pesach. It's forbidden to eat because it's chametz shavalav Pesach. There's a story here in Yerushalayim in the days of Rav David Bar-Ram. There's all different girsos of exactly what happened. Ayin Sefer Eirach David, but the generally accepted girsa is that there was one of the big Talmidei Chachamim here in Yerushalayim who sent a kid round to Rav David Bar-Ram on Matzah Pesach. Rav David Bar-Ram ate on Pesach machine matzahs right through Pesach. And the little kid comes to Rav David Bar-Ram and says, the Tata of Mikashik, that he has a minhag that he eats chametz immediately on Matzah Pesach. So he would like some of your machine matzah to be able to eat, to show the difference between Pesach and after Pesach he eats chametz on Matzah Pesach. And Rav David Bar-Ram gave him some matzah. And very sadly, the next morning this kid didn't wake up. And Rav David Bar-Ram attended the Levaya, and it's debatable what he did say or he didn't say, but according to this girsa of the story, this was considered to be an einish min hashamayim, even if this individual doesn't eat machine matzah, but don't insult and send round a shliach to the person who eats machine matzahs and say that it's chometz gomel. And then there's the middle ground. Those people who hold that machine matzah is kosher matzah, it's not chometz like the Divrei Chaim. You're allowed to eat it on Pesach, but it's not enough to be called making matzah lishma. It's a matzah which is not made lishma, and therefore you can't be mekayim the mitzvah on Seder night of Achilas Matzah with a machine matzah. Because the Torah says, Ushmatem as a matzah, so it has to be a shvir lishma. And a machine is not called a lishma. But nevertheless, on the rest of Pesach, they eat it because it is matzah. This is, we'll call it middle ground in this sugya. Advarim Yeduim, we're heading now towards an Erev Pesach Shechal b'Shabbos. And this Erev Pesach on Shabbos presents a challenge. Why? Because whether you have a minhag that you don't eat matzah from Purim or from Rosh Chodesh Nisan, or you don't have such a minhag, but everyone has a din in Shulchan Aruch that on Erev Pesach you're not allowed to eat matzah. That's a din to Shulchan Aruch, because we want you to eat your matzah, the te'oven, on Seder night. The Rambam says it's not because of eating the te'oven. The Rambam says that there should be a heka between Pesach and pre-Pesach. If you eat the same thing on Erev Pesach that you could eat on Pesach, then when you come around to eating on Pesach, it's not noticeable. You don't recognize, you don't see that you're doing a mitzvah. So therefore, Chazal forbade eating matzah on Erev Pesach, so there should be a heka when you eat it that you're eating in a Shem mitzvah. On the other hand, it's Shabbos. And Shabbos demands I need to eat 3 sudas on Shabbos. And for 3 sudas, I need to wash. I need lechem mishnah. So if you don't let me eat matzah on Erev Pesach, then I'm going to have to eat chametz. And this can be quite a challenge to keep in my house, to eat the chametz, to make sure that I eat at least a kazayas at each meal. Ideally, the Mogen Avram would really like you to eat a kibetza at each meal. So you're keeping a kibetza for each person in the house for 3 meals. So much chametz after Sreifas chametz. And then you've got to make sure you eat it all up in the 3 meals and you don't leave a crumb behind. It's very difficult. Heilige Lelev Rebbe Zechariah Levrocha held, like the Rambam, that the reason why you can't eat matzah on Erev Pesach is to make a heka, not in order that you should eat it with appetite, that you shouldn't have the taste on Erev Pesach. It's in order there should be a heka between the matzos which you eat before the food you eat before Pesach and the matzos on Pesach. What did Lelev Rebbe do on Erev Pesach Shechal b'Shabbos? Came Friday night, he made kiddush. He doesn't want to eat chametz. He doesn't want to keep chametz. He cannot eat matzah with which he's going to be yotzei mitzvah tomorrow night. What did he do? He ate machine matzahs on Friday night. A machine matzah, he holds, is vadai not lishma. So it's a matzah which you cannot be mekayim the mitzvah on Seder night. So there's a heka. I ate a shaloi lishma matzah on Shabbos, and I ate a lishma matzah when it came to Pesach. That's Hanhogas Lelev Rebbe, which the way he looks at machine matzahs is, let us say, according to the Rambam, a good suggestion. There remains a whole long shir to explain that the Lelev Rebbe only did this on Friday night, not Shabbos morning. Shabbos morning, he went already and ate chametz, and that needs a pshat. Why Lelev Rebbe was mechalik? Maybe Beis Hashem for another time. But in Hilchos Yitzchak, he has a tshuva suggesting this. He doesn't agree with it, but he brings those who say it. You can eat a matzah shaloi b'shma the whole of Shabbos on Erev Pesach Shechal b'Shabbos. These are the major shittas about machine matzos. I don't like saying no barabim, but there's a Hasidic sefer which I have, who says, Pshat in the Agada. In the Agada it quotes a pasuk in the Torah. Rosha mo oime, mo avoida azay slochem. Zuk the Hasidic sefer, I don't understand. It's Pesach. What's the question? There's Tarek mitzvahs. Every time you do a mitzvah, the Rosh asks, Zuk the Hasidische Seifer. The Rosh kim mit akasha and afrekt akasha. Why are you bothering yourself with all the tirche involved in making hand matzahs? Zuk the Rosh, why do you need this great big work of working on hand matzahs? And schwitzing away, and rushing and shouting and screaming and getting it into the oven within 18 minutes. I have a better eitzah for you, Zok the Rusha. You can eat machine matzahs. That's the eitzah of the Rusha, Zok the Seifer. Somebody who doesn't eat machine matzah, doesn't need hand matzah, so you know, you shall not legal. As I said, the Hasidic Cipher Rabbi say. But there remain different opinions. I'd like to try and explain a little bit of the sugya. Going back during history, there have been many different objections raised to machine matzahs. And the important thing to remember is that we can't put all machines and all machine matzahs into one bracket and talk about them. There's this machine and that machine, this generation and that generation. And it's important to understand every time you talk about machine matzah, what exactly are we talking about? So historically, matzahs were always circular. Some say because it says in the pasuk uga is matzahs, and ug is a lashon of a circle, og uga, whatever the reason is, matzahs are circular. So the first machine matzahs were circular. Now, it's very difficult for a machine into which you're feeding a big dough to make circles standing by themselves. So what did they do in the original matzahs, the original machine matzahs? They made a long sheet of matzah, which is going into the oven. And then a machine cut out from there a circle. And we only wanted the circle to go into the oven. But we had a whole load of dough from the square or oblong sheet of dough, which isn't going in the oven. So what do you do with that? You take all the surrounding area and put it back into the dough further back, either into the mixer or after the mixer. The obvious thing was, what happened then? If I started baking 9 o'clock in the morning and I baked for 18 minutes so all my round matzahs got into the oven in time, but the area surrounding hasn't got into the oven. And it only gets into the oven after 18 minutes in the next round matzah or the round matzah after that. So you're putting into the oven a dough which has already been out of the oven for 18 minutes. So you're putting in chametz. That was the first major objection. What happened then? In order to get around this problem, and for financial reasons as well, they came along with a different suggestion that we're going to make them oblong, squares, the way we recognize machine matzahs. But there remained a problem. In order not to send things back, further back on the line, the next generation of machine matzahs would punch out either a circle or a square. You don't want me to take all these bits of flour, of dough, and put them back into the apparatus, into the appliances. Okay, so it'll all roll along into the oven together. So what you had was, you had your individual matzahs going into the oven, plus this long piece which goes around all the matzahs. This was a serious problem. If you look in the Tshuvas Yad Mordechai from HaGoiner Mordechai Rottenberg, the Rav of Antwerpen, he writes there that he was under tremendous pressure from his Balabatim to allow machine matzahs. And his problem then was this problem, that the entire long piece was one long piece. Besides your matzahs, you had things connecting. What was in the rollers 5 minutes before the oven is connected with one long piece all the way into the oven. What does that mean? That the part which is in the oven is being heated up by the fire in the oven, and it's connected by dough all the way out the oven. So you're heating up one half of the dough, and the other half is also going to get heated up. And once you heat it up, even outside the oven, the part outside the oven has already become chametz. So we eventually overcame this problem. We don't do a chazorah of putting parts of the dough back, nor do we have a connection from what's in the oven and out the oven. Hagoin Ramaya Shapiro Zechron Livrocha is well known that he set up his incredible moisin of Yeshivas Chachmei Lublin, and he went collecting for a long time in the United States in the 30s for his yeshiva. And he writes a letter when he was in Baltimore. They begged him to give a hechsher to machine matzahs, and they promised him if he gives a hechsher, he'll make enough money for his entire yeshiva and be no more collecting and everyone's going to be looked after. And he had a lot of cheshek to take the deal. But then when he came to look at the matzos, no, he's not giving a hechsher to machine matzos, whatever happens, and even if it means less money for the yeshiva in Lublin. One or two more words before we get involved in the Lomdus. Yedidi Reb Shloima already introduced the sugya. We had a Goyin Reb, the Sholem Meishiv. The Sholem Meishiv was the big matter of machine matzos. And he had a brother-in-law, Ramat Chazev Ittinger, also a big Talmud Chacham. He wrote Shabbos HaTshuvas Maimon Motra, not the sefer we have Maimon Motra on the Shulchan Aruch. Shabbos HaTshuvas Maimon Motra, both of them big gedolim. The Sholem Meishiv, Shol Natanzon, was married to a younger sister of Ramat Chazev Ittinger. And these two, for a long time, were very good friends. They gave out together the Abba Talmud, and they worked on many tshuvas together. For years and years, they were very good friends. Something went sour. It's unclear, it's debated in many different books what happened. But the fact is that Rebbe Shol writes in the Akdama of one of his Sfarim that I was Zoicha at one stage to write together with my brother-in-law a tshuva sefer called Shevas Achim. Shevas Achim, two brothers-in-law wrote sefer together, but since then we've fallen out and we don't get along, and I'm now printing my own Tshuvas Sholem Meishiv, in which there are thousands of Tshuvas. What exactly happened, we don't know. We do know that sometime after this, Ramat Chazev Ittinger and others printed a kuntras called Moidar LeBeis Yisrael, in which they attacked the machine matzos, and this was answered by the kuntras Bittul Moidar, in which the Rebbe Shol defends himself and supports the machine matzos very greatly. And in the next generation, we had the Heilige Marsham. Now, the Marsham was a chassid, but nevertheless sided with the Sholem Meishiv and quotes him as supporting machine matzos. Having said that, not all machine matzos did the Marsham support, but definitely the original machine matzos, which were made the way they were in those days, the Marsham supported in more than one tshuva. And the story goes that they set up a matzah bakery, a machine matzah bakery in Yerushalayim, officially because of the letter of the Marsham, and there was big chaos in Yerushalayim at the time, as there is today in Yerushalayim, whenever there's something to fight about. And subsequently, the Avnei Nezer wrote a tshuva against the Marsham. How could you be machsher the machine matzos against so many gedolim, the Heilige Yichdi and the Divrei Chaim, and so many others who wrote against machine matzos? And they were really contemporaries. They were nifta within a year of one another, if I remember correctly, the Avnei Nezer and the Marsham. But the Avnei Nezer writes very sharp lashon against the Marsham. He calls him against, in comparison to the great gedolim who answered. He says, if you have so many gedolim who answer, then mayasu izuvei akir. How can a zvov, how can a little fly like the Marsham be machsher machine matzos? And the storybooks say that the Tzvi who himself was also a chassid, the Tzvi said, this Avnei Nezer, I have to make a ha'ara. And that Tzvi said, you call the Marsham a little fly on the wall. I knew that little fly on the wall. The Tzvi was 30 years old when the Marsham was nifta. And that little fly was Baki in Gans Shas and Ala Rishonim and Talmud Yerushalmi Baal Peh. Don't call him a little fly. So there were gedolim on both sides, mamash major gedolim on both sides. Some who were machsher and some who were not machsher. And what we want to discuss is an understanding in the longest of what's going on over here. So, we've learned the sugya in Pesachim in Daf Mem, the sugya of LISHMAH MATZOS, and the Shulchan Aruch paskins, although there's two opinions, whether you should have Shmira only Mishas Lisha or already Mishas Katsira, the Shulchan Aruch wants a Shmira Mishas Katsira, from the Shas Katsira already. The second point that the Shulchan Aruch says is, what happens if the Goy does the work and there's a Yisrael Oimid al Gabor? That means that the Goy is going to do the kneading, the Goy is going to put it into the oven, and the Jew is standing there and shouting L'shem Matzos Mitzvah. The Jew is standing there making sure it's done right. The Shulchan Aruch says that such a matzah you could eat on Pesach. It's not chametz. There's a yid who saw that it's not chametz, but it's not called lishmah. The goy did the baking, the goy did the kneading. It doesn't help that there's a Jew standing there. Yisrael Omer al Gabor doesn't help, and the goy doesn't help. And therefore this matzah is not called lishmah. It would seem, before we start the sugya, that this is exactly the same as a machine matzah. What's a machine matzah? If we would say that pressing the button of the machine is not called lishmah, not a ma'aseh lishmah, okay? So the machine is doing the baking, there's a Jew standing there, and the Jew is making sure it's all done right. That should be exactly the same as a goy with the Yisrael Omer al Gabor. And Shulchan Aruch says you can't eat. This is not called a lishmah. In fact, there is a ra'ah brought down in the Achronim. The Tzvi brings down the ra'ah, and the Achronim bring it down. And the ra'ah argues, the ra'ah says, no, it doesn't matter if the goy puts it in the oven or the goy does the kneading and baking, as long as there's a Jew standing there. So perhaps we might have thought that according to the ra'ah, it's going to be good by the machine. But no, the ra'ah doesn't say it's kosher because the Yisrael Omer al Gabor, he's the one who's making it lishmah. It doesn't say that. The ra'ah says that the goy doesn't need it to make a lishmah l'shem mitzvah. A goy can't make l'shem mitzvah, but the goy can be mechavan l'shem matzah and want to eat a matzah. Says the ra'ah, it's good enough if the goy is thinking and saying l'shem matzah, it doesn't need l'shem matzah's mitzvah. That's the opinion of the ra'ah, and therefore he allows a goy with Yisrael Omer al Gabor. But that's only because the goy is mechavan l'shem matzah, but the machine won't have the heta of the ra'ah either. Nevertheless, there are a number of svaras in the Achronim who want to say that a machine matzah with the yid standing there, and the yid says lishmah or switches on the machine lishmah, is better than a goy doing the baking with Yisrael Omer al Gabor. How can it be better? So the first is the chidah. The chidah doesn't discuss directly machine matzahs, but there are chidah in Machzik Bracha says an interesting thing. You have a rechaim to grind your wheat and make flour. Shulchan Aruch wants it should be lishmah from the Ketzir. Some learn from the Ketzir itself. Sechemet says from after the Ketzir, but from after the Ketzir, the Tchina needs to be lishmah. And many hold that even if the goy is doing the Tchina and the yid is Omer al Gabor, is no good. Because just like if the goy is putting it into the oven and Yisrael Omer al Gabor is no good, so too if the goy is doing the grinding and the Jew is standing there saying the Shema, is also no good. There are many who hold that way, not like the Taz on the Chasam Sofer. Nevertheless, says the Chidah, if an animal is walking around, round and round, turning the mill, and there's a Jew standing there saying the Shema, that's good. How can a Yisrael Oimid al Behema be better than a Yisrael Oimid al Hagoy? Says the Chidah, really the Jew standing there should be enough of an ingredient of Lishma. So why is the Shulchan Aruch machmeh by a goy with Yisrael Oimid al Gabor? Because the goy thinks whatever he wants to think. And when we're considering, are these matzahs baked al das, the guy who did the baking or did the milling, or al das, the yid who's standing there, obviously the guy who's doing the actual grinding is misgaber, and he's not mechavan Hashem. He's mechavan Hashem something else. Says the Chidah, if you take the guy out of the picture, there's an animal. The animal thinks nothing at all. And then you've got a yid with omed al gabai, that's enough to be called lishma. So the machine is exactly the same as a behemoth. The machine doesn't think anything. It's neither here nor there. So according to the Chidah, the Yisrael omed al machine will also be good enough for lishma. But there's many who argue on the Chidah. The next comes a very interesting thing. Why is the Yisrael omed al gabai not good enough? True. The guy, when he does the baking, he puts it in the oven. The guy does the kneading. He can't be mechavan l'shem mitzvah. There's no shaychus. Even if he's going to say l'shem mitzvah, it doesn't mean anything. But why isn't it good enough when the yid stands there and he says the shem MATZOS mitzvah? So it's very well known that the Minchas Chinuch says, and he was zeicher to be mechavan to Meir and Orchos Chaim and many others. The Rishonim say, bring a Gemara and Chagiga. The Gemara says in Chagiga, Ein Adam Meshamer Masha B'yad Chaveira. It's not possible for me to take responsibility for something which somebody else is holding in his hand. Who is the one who's ultimately responsible and controls what's in his hand? The person holding it in his hand. The person standing on the side cannot control what's in your hands. Ein adam meshamer masha b'yad chaver. Says the Meiri, the guy is holding this matzah in his hand. The yid can stand there, but he's powerless because the guy is the one who's controlling what's going on. If the Jew is powerless, then the Jew saying LISHMAH is neither here nor there. Says the Mikroi Kodesh of Tzvi Pesach Frank, the Moedim Mazmanim Ramoshe Stemach, and many others. If the reason why the Yisrael omed al gabai is because Ein Adam Meshamer Masha B'yad Chaveroi, that's true when there's a guy who's working on the matzah. So the guy makes his own decisions. I don't make the decisions. The guy makes the decisions. Ein Adam Meshamer Masha B'yad Chaveroi. So the Jew standing there can't make it a lishma. However, by a machine, there is no rule. Ein Adam Meshamer Masha B'yad machine. Forget. I'm in charge. I dictate to the machine exactly what to do. So there's no reason why it shouldn't be called LISHMAH when the yid is standing there LISHMAH, controlling what the machine does. This is the opinion of Reb Tzvi Pesach and many others. However, we have to admit that there are cholkim on the Minchas Chinuch. On this kasha of the Minchas Chinuch, why doesn't it help? Forget the God, let the Jew be doing a shmira. Advarim you're doing the Chasam Sofer is a different tenets. Chasam Sofer says, even if I could control what's in somebody else's hands, it's not going to help. Why? Says the Chasam Sofer, if you place together in a bowl flour and water, you've created all the ingredients for making chametz. This, if it's left alone, will become chametz automatically, without anybody doing anything at all. How do you stop it becoming chametz? By working on it. The working on the matzah is what prevents it becoming chametz. Says the Chasam Sofer, at this stage, when you've already mixed the flour and the water, there's no point saying, I'm being shomer, I'm standing here being shomer lishma, because there is no shmira in standing here. What's the shmira of a dough that it shouldn't become chametz? Working on it. Who's working on it? The guy. So the Jew is relevant. Chasam Sofer learns from this a moedik chiddush in halacha. We go back to the taina of the chidah. By tchina, we have an animal who's turning the mill, or even a goy who's turning the mill, and the minig is that we allow the goy to turn the mill. If you don't let the guy put it into the oven, you don't let the guy do the baking, the kneading, so why do you let the guy do the milling? Says the Chasam Sofer Pashat. At the stage of grinding, there is no water. So what's the shmira at that stage? To ensure that no water gets here, that it doesn't come into contact with water. That's nothing to do with the fellow who's doing the grinding. That's somebody standing on the side, making sure no water comes. So he's doing the shmira. What's the shmira requisite at this stage? The water shouldn't come. But once you've already mixed it with water, says the Chasam Sofer, there's no point standing on the side. Standing on the side won't help you anymore. There's already water in the bowl. What avoids it becoming chametz? Working on it. All work has to be done lishma by the person doing it lishma. That's the Chasam Sofer. Now, the emes is that this machlokes Chasam Sofer and Minchas Chinuch could l'chayru be a machlokes in the Rishonim. The HaRav brings down from HaRav. HaRav says that there's 3 malachas which are mandatory in every matzah. And they are, you're going to need lisha, you have to make a dough. Aricha is making from the dough into a matzah. And then afiyah, putting it into the oven. These are the 3 stages which you need to have. Says HaRav, all these 3 stages have to be done by a yid, a bar mitzvah, got to be done right, LISHMAH. But, says HaRav, we make holes in all of our MATZOS. Because we have thin little MATZOS, you put them in the oven, it's just going to blow up and burn. So you need little holes in the MATZOS. Says the HaRav, the guy who makes the holes doesn't need to do it LISHMAH. He doesn't need to be Jewish, he doesn't need to be mitzvah. Because the LISHMAH is a din in making a matzah. What does the Torah require for making a matzah? Kneading, making into a matzah, rolling out, and putting into the oven. Torah doesn't require me to make holes. That doesn't need to be done LISHMAH. The HaRav brings down Avol b'Maril Kosav. The Maril says no. Everything from the time when the flour and water join till it gets into the oven, everything has to be done LISHMAH. Why? Because anything that you're doing with your dough is preventing it becoming chametz. So any malacha that you do, any matzah that you do, whether necessary or not necessary for the production of a matzah, but it's necessary to avoid chametz, that's going to be done LISHMAH. So Maril's learned clearly that the din of LISHMAH is a din in anything to avoid it becoming chametz. And HaRav learns, no, it's a din in what you need to make a matzah. The Chasam Sofer definitely goes with the Maril. HaRav maybe with the Minchas Chinuch. It's interesting to note, there's a very interesting kula from the Kosher HaRav in his Sefer Eretz Tzvi, where he says, if HaRav says that there's 3 stages, making a dough, rolling it out, and putting it into the oven, these 3 need to be done LISHMAH. Why do you need to roll it out? Because you made a dough which is big and thick and high, and it's too big. You can't put this in. It's not a matzah. You can't put it into the oven. A matzah, min adin, has to be less than a tefach in height. So if you have a big dough and you split it into smaller pieces so that they should be smaller than a tefach, that's called aricha and is necessary al pidin. Says the kosher glover, once you've already cut it and it's less than a kazai, less than a tefach in height. So we have a minute today, us Ashkenazim, we don't make big matzahs. So we roll it out again and again and again till it's a real thin matzah. But you don't need that minadin. Says the kosher glover, in the same way that HaRav says that making the holes doesn't need to be done LISHMAH, any rolling out less than the height of a tefach doesn't need to be done LISHMAH. I was once in a matzah bakery, and there was a kid who either was or wasn't bar mitzvah helping in the baking of the matzahs. And I asked, how come this kid is rolling out the matzah? And they said, we have instructions like the kosher glover, that the one who's making the dough and putting it in the oven and rolling it out less than a tefach, that's got to be done lishma by a bar mitzvah boy. But once it's less than a tefach, anything will go. It's all okay, because it's not necessary minadir. That's not like the Chasam Sofer and all those who go with his opinion. The final, if we can call it final, there is no final, but the final that we have the ability to discussion to be machsher a machine matzah, is the Chazon Ish. And the Chazon Ish is talking about our machine matzahs of today. The old machine matzahs, we know, didn't even employ electricity. What were they doing? Instead of using a rolling pin for the matzah, they had great big walzen rollers, which were so big and heavy they were able to control and work on a big dough. And on the side you had a handle, which was connected with a whole load of wheels and pulleys. And there was a man who was turning the wheel, which turned another wheel, which turned the pulley, which turned the big drum, and the big drum kneaded the matzah. And at that time, the discussion with those matzahs was whether the maisa of the rolling of the first wheel is considered to be making lishma when the big drum turns over the matzah. That was the original discussion of the Sholem Meshiv and his brother-in-law, Ramot Chazev Ettinger. In the meantime, we've now moved on to electrics. In that generation, there was a question, is it called groma? Is it called a koichai? And there were riots from Shchita, where it's koichai in Mazik is chayev, so perhaps koichai is good for Lishma. And others said, no, Lishma is different, and arrived from the dinim of Shchita, and Shulchan Aruch here and there, and Zayim. That's a long discussion. Today we've moved on to machines mamash, where the machine is run by electricity, and I put it into the machine. For this, we have one discussion, the Chazon Ish, and another discussion, the Torah's Rafal of a Rafal Volozhin and those who go with him. The Torah's Rafal compares this to a Bir Halacha, where the Bir Halacha says in Hilchos Shabbos that if there's a Rechaim Shalmayim turning, a windmill or a watermill, it's turning anyway, and I put in the seeds and they get milled. So I didn't actually provide the energy to grind, but I put them in a position where they're going to be ground by whichever energy is moving anyway. The Bir Halacha brings down from the Even HaOizer that I'm chayev mishum toichin b'shams. So the Torah's Rafal from Rafal Volozhin, he holds that this is also going to be called lishma. This is called making it lishma. In the same way that I'm chayev on Shabbos mishum toichin, so it's going to be kosher for Pesach because I did a tchina lishma. Where's the tchina lishma? By placing my wheat in a place where I know that this is what's going to happen to it, even if the energy might come from a different source. Others argue with him and they say, no, Shabbos you might be chayev, but Lishma it won't be. Now comes the Chazon Ish. Chazon Ish compares to a Gemara in Sanhedrin. Chazon Ish is dealing with a Shulchan Aruch in Hilchos Tzitzis, where the Shulchan Aruch allows a goy to be toiva, to make the thread, when there's a yid oimed al gaboy. And the question is, how can you allow such a thing? Yisrael oimed al gaboy? We don't generally allow that. So the Chazon Ish says a chiddush. Number one, the psul of a goy is not throughout. Initially, when the goy starts, he's doing it lishma. The reason why a goy is possible is because afterwards the goy changes and it's not anymore lishma. Says the Chazon Ish, a chiddush. Once you take a thread and you make the first spin, lishma, now the whole thread is called stoma lishma. It's oimed for making tzitzis. because the first initial bit was the Shem Tzitzis, it was LISHMAH. Now, by making that LISHMAH, you made the whole thing Stama LISHMAH. If it's already a Stama LISHMAH, Yisrael Omer Al Gabo is good enough. Once you've created initially a situation of a Stama LISHMAH. Says the Chazon Ish, the same should apply by matzah. When I put the dough in, the very first little bit that I put into the machine, that's called LISHMAH. That's like the Gemara says in Sanhedrin, by a bidka d'maya. If you remove the bidka d'maya, whatever happens immediately, you're chayiv mishum ritzicha. Everything afterwards, it keeps going for 5 minutes, you're not chayiv. Says the Chazon Ish in the case of a matzah, if the initial putting into the machine, the first time you put on the machine, that's called LISHMAH, the first bit of lisha is LISHMAH, in the same way that the first little bit creates that the my threads are Stama LISHMAH, so too says the Chazon Ish, the first bit of baking, if it's done LISHMAH with the first bit Kedamaya, I've now created a dough which is Stama LISHMAH. And if the dough is Stama LISHMAH, everything that flows afterwards will be kosher, even with a Yisrael Oimed Al Gabri. These are the major mahalchim of those who allow machine matzos, those who consider machine matzos to be LISHMAH. Really, in truth, to be fair, each and every one of these svaros needs a discussion in its own right. But ten l'chacham v'yech kamoid, I know and I'm sure and I'm convinced that each and every one of the mishtatvei Shia is a Talmud Chacham who understands the sugyas well and will be moisif me'atzmoi on these sugyas. Eibusha helfen each and every one of us. Kol echad kafi darkoi should be zocher to be mekayim the mitzvah of achilas matzah correctly, and in this way be zocher to the mechla da asvusa, which should bring refuas to the entire Klal Yisrael, including Yedidi Reb Shlomo.